Friends, thanks for hanging on my YouTube channel or wherever you're watching this. It is a joy for me. It's a gift every time I get to talk to this dude, and I think you're gonna like it too. This is my friend Dr. Stu. Dr. Stu is what are you, a professor of spine biomechanics? Is that right, sir?
That's what they used to call ES before I retired, and now I don't know what they call me. I'm just a back pain guy, I guess.
Where are you right now? You're at BackFit. You're at your.
I'm at BackFit Pro, which is in the basement of our house. If you ever want a tour, I'll take you on one, but I'll show you some of the tricks of the trade that we use. As you've been here, of course, we've got our fight gear that the fighters use, that we make our measures and try and understand what the mechanisms of their pain and gifts of their performance truly is. And we've got different toys for achieving the goals that we need to get rid of their pain and get them back to performing well.
Nice. Well, man, I guess we've known each other, it must be 6 or 7 years now since we first met, and it was connected to the fact that you have studied amongst all the different performance things you've looked at some of the neurological and biomechanical mechanisms of fighting, correct?
I believe we were the first to look at the neurology and mechanics that ends up with a very fast, hard-hitting strike. Some of the neurological funk that happens with different submission holds, and as you know, I'm a little bit weird. One of the great joys of what I do is I get to roll in the cage, or I get to do a little bit of banging. Now, look, I'm in my mid-60s. I don't have the body for this anymore, but the point is to feel what a choke really feels like, and then to go out, or to have a joint crank done at the most mild of levels, and to realize the brilliance of the technique, and then to have a little play with a fighter who doesn't look like much. Mm-hmm. Think of some of the most devastating knockout artists that we've both seen over the years. They're not the most physically impressive looking guys, as we've talked, the guys with the big muscles, they push their punches, they push their kicks. Whereas if you can just get that little pop at the right angle, and your breakdowns have just been absolutely spectacular at analyzing the foot plant, the hip turn, how the stiffness gets projected through the linkage, ends up with the snap, and that final little pulse of how it's, brother, you might as well get hit by a piece of granite or a Honda.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you, man. I've always appreciated your insight, and my research is kind of self-directed. It ends up being like, what's the next layer to peel as I try to understand the truth of what something is. And getting to know you over the years, and some of the input that you've given me has been really helpful. There's a breakdown I put out yesterday that has been shared a lot, hundreds of thousands of times through Bellator. And I called you, I sent you pieces of it, and I checked in with you. You saw it, right? Give me your feedback.
I did, Robin. It was brilliant. The lexicon, the word choice, and the science. You used the word truth a few minutes ago. That's what you do. It's a scientific veracity that comes through the movement expression. It was a fabulous breakdown.
Thank you. And I really appreciated your help putting it together. I started having the deep curiosity of a moment like this when I was fighting. And after literally thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions with my coach, Billy Martin, to slip and punch. And he would stand there with me for literally years. And one day I was sparring and training with high-level guys, and I would slip and punch. And it just happened. And then I started to be curious, how and why is this possible? Something has changed in my brain that made that possible. And that's when I came to you to try to dig out with the Sergio piece, with Sergio's response, that we had created a hard wiring through his pre-programming that was expressed as this neurological response, correct?
Absolutely.
And what's so, like, what was the word you just used? It wasn't voodoo. It was, when you were talking about sort of the magic that happens in these sort of moments and mechanics of these athletes. I forget what word you used.
Well, I'm getting so senile, I can't remember either. But
when you,
it's so true. When we look at the different tools that fight camps use to establish this movement tape, or the engram as it's described, and think back to the old ways, the ways of 2,000 years ago, where a grasshopper had to repeat the movement over and over and over again for the master. And the grasshopper would complain, oh, why do I have to do this slip and parry? Okay, slip and parry, slip and parry. Come on, I think I've got it now. And yet that fighter, who I know quite well, was in a bar, and a fella came at him with a broken beer bottle that he didn't see until the very last minute, slip and parry, and it saved his life. Wow. So there is an example of the truth and expression that we all see in the cage, but these are things that are trained. They become hardwired, automatic movement tapes triggered by a stimulus. And that's what training is all about.
It's just, to me, this is, and it's another layer and another layer. What's happening in the brain? What's happening in the body? How did the body do it? Why did the brain see it? How did you train that response? To me, this is an eternal search for another layer of understanding how and why this is happening. But when we watch fighting, even, and I'm curious about this as well, to ask you, the seeing, how does an athlete train to see time in a slower motion, or is that a correct way to express this?
Well, you've met Catherine, my wife, who's a sports psychology consultant, and this very much goes into that world of getting in the zone. And when you're in the zone, time slows down, and it doesn't matter whether you're batting 300 in the major leagues. That fastball coming at you looks like a beach ball when you're in the zone. And when you're not in the zone, it's in the catcher's mitt before you have the neurological response. So do you see now that's a difficult question? How do you get in the zone?
I certainly do. So I put a little thesis in the middle of that piece, and this is something I've been, any idea that hopefully means something will eventually sound basic, but it probably takes a long time to figure it out. But the thesis that I kind of try to anchor this thinking around is the brain will perform the way it's been programmed to perform if the artist is in an optimal state of focus and arousal.
Bingo.
And that's my simple thesis. And it took years to come up with just the simplicity of it. But that simplicity is, we start with, if we are not in our flow state, if we have not created that environment in which we can process and be in a high performance state, our training may not work appropriately. Do you find that that's true?
Do you remember a conversation we had? It was after a Canadian UFC event, and we were talking about the fighters leaving their dressing room and climbing into the cage. And the strategies, the crowd doesn't realize what's going on until you're on the inside and you really talk to the fighters. What is with the music selection? What is in the dance? And it is, you use the word optimal state of mind. They are getting to that optimal state of mind. If they get over aroused, they'll have an adrenaline dump and then game over after round one. Or if they're a little bit flat, now the spikes, the neural drive, the brain is running the movement tapes, but they're not dense yet. So they're not quick. The muscles on, muscles off are a bit slow, and they have a quick trip to the hospital. So that state of arousal, it can't be too high and it can't be too low. It's optimal. That was the perfect word. And this preparatory routine is so important to getting to that state, and then the engrams, and then we've talked about flow before. Then it's the flow. It's one stimulus and response after another.
It's an incredible thing to think about, that when we're watching the fight itself, it's almost pointless to judge these momentary, movements, choices, responses, because really at their best, they are a reflection of the preparation that's been done days, weeks, months, and years ago. Isn't that? And that idea to me is so wild. That what is happening now, if we got you in the proper state of focus, arousal, optimum, that now you are going to express pre-prepared responses and actions based on the activity that's happening between you and another trained brain, a body attached to another trained brain. And all of a sudden, this is magic.
Just listening to you now, I think of two of your breakdowns. I think of the one yesterday, which was a brilliant explanation of a counterpunch. So the stimulus made him wobble, and he created an instant tape running, stiffness, and fire. I go back to a breakdown you did of Conor McGregor, where you went 3 moves ahead, and every time within 3 moves, he set up that funky little hook that comes out of nowhere when he's got someone up against the cage.
Yeah, floating them out.
The floating around. But the way you broke it down, oh, here it is again. He's setting it up, and there it is. So that's the opposite. That's not the counterpunch. That is setting and leading the opponent into the trap. So, but how many people really see this? And, this is what you and I get off on when we watch the competitions. I'm not really a blood and guts guy at all. In fact, I hate seeing my work destroyed in the cage. Enjoy the hostilities.
Yeah. Oh God, it really is truly fascinating. When I'm so appreciative of your insight, and it means a lot to me to self-direct this kind of learning over, decades, and trying to learn, and then to get feedback like that from you really means a lot to me. Would it surprise you to hear that there are large swaths of the audience who would view that breakdown yesterday and literally think it's nonsense? Would that surprise you?
Well, it never surprises me, human behavior. So if you had a skilled person who knew the sweet science, they would never say that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right. Yeah, you're right. And we all react to things differently. Some people are scared of change and new ideas. And that's human. That's just what it is to be human. But what are you working on, Dr. Stu? What do you got cooking?
Well, it never ends, and it's really driven by who is ever here at the time. So if it's a sprinter or a fighter or just a person struggling with back pain, that's what I'm into at the time. So when they ask me a question, and as you know, quite often they'll come with their coaches or their docs, they'll ask me a question, and when I say, geez, I don't know the answer to that, now that's what I'm into. So it's the clients, the athletes, the people who are really suffering that drive our research program, and it always has been that way. So that's been the dance or the relationship with clinician and patient or athlete. That's the way.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, your curiosity is stimulated when you don't know the answer, and then you'll obsessively need to find it, and your research continues. And to some degree, The Gift of Injury is one of your books. That's a little bit of the story of that for the human on the other end as well. The Gift of Injury is part of that journey.
Well, it very much was. The specific athlete that you're talking about there was a fellow named Brian Carroll, who had 2 world records squatting and powerlifting in 2 different weight categories, and he came to me with a really horrific back injury. He'd been to many top docs and surgeons before, and no one really offered him a solution. And when he came to me, I thought, oh, holy heck, this is a disaster of an injury. He'd split his sacrum front to back. And honestly, I didn't know what to do. I said to him, I think I can get you out of pain. Let's try that. And then what he said, as every champion will do, Good. And when I'm out of pain, I want my world record back. So that's what I'm going to train for. And I thought, Brian, if you were my son, I'd have to tell you, this is a catastrophic injury for the type of strength athlete you are. Well, the gift of injury was the documentation of mechanostimulating him for the next year. So I first tried a surgical technique, which is called a kyphoplasty. So if you're an older osteoporotic female and you've had a little bit of a vertebral fracture and collapse, the surgeon drills a hole in your vertebra and pumps it up with bone cement and stabilizes it that way. So I took some cadavers, I created the same sacral fracture, I did kyphoplasties, tried to plump it up with bone cement and whatnot, but I couldn't get the disc to seal. So he would never be an athlete to bear a load again. So we worked on a process called bone callousing, which was a very scientific approach that actually I learned about on strengthening turkey wings. So if you take a turkey and you immobilize one of their wings, it becomes osteoporotic. It has no load stimulus to keep the bone healthy, so it leaks mineral. Anyway, it turns out it's a 5-day turnover. So you stimulate the bone and then you take 5 days off to let the new bone scaffold in with some real substantial chemical bonding, and you keep building the bony callus over the fracture. You have to do that for about a year. And then he started to train once again. Long story short, he's now squatted over 1,100 pounds now, and he's going 1,200 pounds this fall, which will be a human record for his body. He will be the lightest man in history to ever do that. This is following a real catastrophic injury in 2013. So that's the story of the book. But there was an example where I didn't know what to do. So it was a logic searching for different mechanisms that could possibly work, doing some sub-experiments, and then saying, okay, you are going to be an experiment in progress, and if I don't help you, he's going to do it anyway.
Right. Wow, crazy, just wild. And to look everywhere for the answer is what real mastery is. To see it anywhere in the world, whether that's a turkey or how somebody builds something, it's really fascinating. It's interesting. I never thought of this so specifically till you were saying that. I personally find challenges and I feel the tension of knowing I don't understand something or understand it incorrectly. And unless I go back and disassemble it and try to re-understand it, I'll stop my progress. But it doesn't matter if that happens, because I'm only talking about fighting and hoping that people see something. When you're doing it, that's a human spine. You know, that's a human life. Like, it's a completely different thing. But then the payoff must be so massive. That human being's life has changed forever. And then everything you learned from working with that human being and changing his life can now change many other human lives. It's a wild thing you do, Dr. Stu.
It doesn't always work out quite so well, but I have a colleague who says, McGill, you're a spine slut. You will do anything with anybody at any time to try and come up with the answer. And then I said, well, no, actually, I'm just a spinophile. So I call you a fight slut. I will call you a fightophile.
I will take that gladly and proudly. Before I let you go, thank you again. Thank you always for your insight. I think the first time we met, and I say this proudly, but trying to be humble, is you would watch something I did on the Fight Network and then sought out to find me to talk to me about it, which is a mess.
I saw this because I knew what was behind your words, and I see what we both do is pattern recognition, right? You're brilliant at seeing patterns and understanding the mechanism behind those patterns. I think I'm the same. If you're in the game of trying to read people, you have to be a good pattern recognizer. And I saw in you, I said, man, that guy's a brother. He gets it. And we both have the same. I don't think. Now let me ask you something, Robin. Did you impress your high school teachers with? You did.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't.
Really? I did with my odd ideas. I stood out for sure as being odd and thinking differently. But I got really bored by about grade 12. I was into the things I'm interested in. I'm deeply interested in, and the things I'm not, I just can't do them.
Right.
You know.
Right.
You know. You didn't, eh? You didn't. You even in science, you didn't stand out.
Oh, not as a high school student. No, I couldn't understand it. Not at all. It was
Wow.
just magic and mystery to me. And it wasn't until I got to university where I had some professors who explained to me how science works in water flowing through a pipe exam or something like that. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. Is that all it is?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it fused together. Biology became chemistry, became physics, became mathematics. There was no separation anymore. And then that flowed into human function. So, our colleagues, they're neurologists and psychologists and biomechanists and whatnot. And to me, it was movement that just couldn't talk about something as a neurological process or a mechanical process or a psychological process. There was no separation. And so
that is exactly the sort of the part of the river I'm kind of floating in right now. There is no boxing or wrestling or jiu-jitsu. I say this all the time. People think I'm crazy, but boxing is just a series of belief systems. Karate is just a belief systems. All it is moving your body in a way that you believe is functional, that you believe somebody else believed was worthwhile, that somebody taught because somebody believed was. You're using the belief systems to choose how to move your body. And I'm with you. It's really hard to separate. It isn't just step here, pivot here, then this, then slip, and this thing. Something is happening in the mind, in the body, in the emotion, in the biology, and it's all happening at the same time. I cannot remove a kick from the action of the brain. I can't separate them. It seems to me rudimentary to try.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting observation because you've just described the evolution of MMA. Think back to, UFC 1, 2, 3, 4. It was the boxer against the wrestler against the whoever. Now there is no separation. They're an MMA athlete or artist, and they're just everything. They're just so skilled at movement, applying force, avoiding compromise, and then the psychology. It's just a wonderful thing to study.
And it's all exponentially changing and growing, and they relate. The better your brain is working, the better you move, which allows you to have different strategies, which will teach you different tactics and so forth. It's just absolutely fascinating, endlessly fascinating. I will never get any less interested, only more interested. Can you give me thank you again for your time, man. It's just such a pleasure every time I talk to you. Can you give me a direction or two to mine over the next months and weeks and months to play with actually, let me ask you this. This is sitting around in my head. If we watch two fighters moving and we remove them and we literally only see two brains and all of the nervous systems that are moving around each other, so we blur our vision and we see only their neurologies, you start to see that there are interactions happening far beyond sight, that other things are happening with their relationship to each other, to position from each other, to distance, the relationship between my weapons and your targets, even certain flinches that you move seem to be related to other neurology rather than just sight. And should I continue down this crazy road?
Absolutely. I think, I've got two comments and thoughts that were going through my head as you were explaining that. We had a system in my lab at the university for monitoring human motion, and it was a Vicon system, which is used by Hollywood to make the movie Avatar. So those were real actors driving the the avatars. So they would have little infrared markers over the actor's face and over their body. And then we had 12 cameras all around the lab. It was painted black, and these reflective markers would give us three-dimensional coordinates, and we would reconstruct the bodies. Now, here's the funny thing. I could put any avatar on it I like. So I could have you driving a very Rubenesque woman's avatar. Now that looks weird. That looks really weird. Yeah. Or I then have a strength athlete driving a very petite woman's avatar. Or I will then have that petite woman who is a dancer driving an avatar of a soldier, a male soldier. Now you start getting into that world that you were talking about. Yeah. All you see is the avatar movement, but call it something, the pattern recognition, it plays with your mind because something is very now. And there's a very interesting website that you should go on. There's a professor, he's a psychologist at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and it's the biomotion or biolocomotion lab.ca, and he has an avatar, and that avatar is just someone walking. Then he makes the avatar male, and then he makes the avatar female. And these are all archetypical movement patterns that fit a male and a female. So the female, you get a bit of valgus at the elbows, a little bit of internal rotation at the hip. The male is the opposite, bit of varus at the knees. And anyway, you'll see, and then you make them happy, and they perk up and they walk a little bit faster. Then you make them sad and they flex down. So the posture of clinical depression is not, hey, I'm clinical depressed. Right. It is this. And when you look at, there's a show on Netflix called Losers, and it documents a boxer, and you can tell when he's lost a fight. It's this. We can both watch someone leave the cage, and we know who won, who lost, just like that happened. So then he goes through when you have fear, what happens? You stiffen up, your stride shortens. Now, if you're in the cage, where are you going? You're going. So this will really fascinate you. So go to the Biolocomotion Lab. Nico Troye is the professor's name, Troje, Troye. Okay, cool. And Nico is Nico. And go look at his walking avatar and give it a motion, give it a gender, and watch the funk happen with the patterns.
Funk. That was the word I was trying to think of that you said earlier. When you look into these things and you see the funk, I say voodoo. You look at it and it's voodoo sometimes. But when you're all of a sudden able to look at the move, that we're obsessed with the movement of these humans, and when just the emotion or their mood or their gender or any of these things, all of a sudden that's causing you to see, these are thin slices of looking at something a different way, which is really what our jobs are. Our continued study is continually looking at the same thing in as many different ways as possible and from as many different perspectives. Just, God, man, I will never, ever, ever get tired of this. And I love talking to you, man. It's such a pleasure every single time.
Well, myself included. Fabulous. If I was still a professor, you would have come down, given a little guest talk, and we would have done one of these things in front of the students, and then we would have gone to the labs and seen the neurology, psychology, how exercise affects different cancers. There's a mechanics and a psychology to all of that. Et cetera, et cetera. It never ended. It was fabulous.
Oh, man. Well, let's stay in touch. And thank you again for your help with the Sergio piece. And thank you for your kind words and letting me know that it was scientifically truthful. I appreciate it a lot.
That's the right word.
Thank you, Dr. Stu. And thanks, everybody, for watching. You're at BackFit Pro on Instagram, I believe, at Dr. Stuart McGill on Twitter. Do you got a YouTube channel?
No, I don't use Twitter. I'm sorry. But if folks want to go to backfitpro.com, which is our website, there's all sorts of articles and podcasts. My books are on there, etc.
Well, thank you again, my friend. And until I see you next time, enjoy the hostilities, brother.
Thank you.